In this video we're going to be tackling this question, investigating incidents. It's actually a 30-point question, so there's 3 parts to it, A, B and C, and there's 10 points available for each part. What I'll be going through is just part A for now, and I'll probably cover parts B and C in future videos. So the question is, you've decided that the recent accident where a worker's leg was broken needs to be investigated. Decide what level of investigation, minimal, low, medium or high, is appropriate in this case, clearly justifying each step you take that leads to your decision. And there's a note that says you should reference the likelihood and consequence criteria described in HSG 245. And you should support your answer, where applicable, using relevant information from the scenario. So with this question being worth 10 points, what we want to be looking at is a word count of around about 330 words, taking into account that 10% leeway. So we're being asked to decide on what level of investigation is appropriate, but really the question is more about us being able to clearly justify the steps that we took that justify that decision. It's not really about selecting the correct level of investigation, although that's obviously important, but it's more about the explanation, the being able to demonstrate that we understand the factors that go into that decision. We're directed to look at HSG 245. This is the document investigating accidents and incidents, and we've got some definitions of the criteria. If you scroll down a little bit, under the section understanding the language of investigation, we've got consequence and likelihood. What we're going to do is make some decisions around what we think the consequence level is and what the likelihood level is. Now I'm assuming you're fully familiar with the scenario, but if not, then obviously read through the scenario first so that you can make an informed decision. We'll put a link to it in the description. My thinking is that in terms of the consequence, so this, I would say, consequence, fatal, potential, that's what you're looking at. It's not what happened on this occasion, because obviously on this occasion the worker's leg was broken and he didn't die, but potentially, and could a forklift truck accident like that could easily be fatal. So I'm going to select fatal for the consequence. And then in terms of likelihood, and my thinking is it's going to be somewhere between likely and certain. Yeah, I think certain on this one. It'll happen again and soon, based on the factors that we're going to now talk about in the main part of the answer to the question. Because what you do is once you've made your decision about the consequence and the likelihood, further on down in this document here, you're able to use those 2 factors to decide on what level of investigation it should be. So what did I say? Fatal for the potential worst consequence of the adverse event, and certain in terms of the likelihood of reoccurrence. Now what you'll see here is a colour-coded system, so if you end up in the red, then that's a high level investigation. And what you'll notice is that any incident that could cause potential fatal consequences, that would always be a high level of investigation, regardless of what the likelihood is. But as I said, the question's not really about making the choice here. the answer and the points available is going to be around, well, what information led me to think that it's a certain likelihood of reoccurrence, and what information from the scenario led me to think that it's potentially fatal if a similar incident were to happen again. That's where the points are going to be. So my approach would be to, because we've got to make 10 points here. It's a 10-point question, meaning that you're looking to make 10 distinct points. So if we could have 5 points around likelihood and 5 points around the consequence side of things, that would give us our 10 points. So what I would do is use a structure like something like that. What this is this is just the question copied and pasted to save me flitting from one document to the other. And then what I've got in this table here is the likelihood, and then the justification, and the consequences, and the justification, and then the level of investigation going down below. So if I can get 5 points, at least 5 points here, and then at least 5 points here, so we should be in pretty good shape if we can get at least 5 points under likelihood and 5 points under consequence. So phase 1 then would be to read through the scenario and then pull out any information I could use later on in phase 2, where I would expand on it to justify why it is that I think it's certain that it's going to happen again soon. So if we go to the scenario and start reading through it with likelihood in mind. So what is it about the scenario and the information that makes me think that very high likelihood that there's going to be another incident again fairly soon? The first few paragraphs don't really yield much, but then you start to see information like this. So since you started your new job, you've seen lots of examples of rule breaking in the warehouse. So clearly that's a piece of information that's informing my decision and my thinking around it being certain that there's going to be another incident again in the future. So what I would do is I would just basically grab that sentence or just something to remind me, or just type it in. But I would be going back to me justification there and put in, you know, lots of rule breaking. That's all I would put for now. I know I've got something to work with there, and I can come back to this later in phase 2 to kind of expand on that and write a sentence or two around why I think the fact that there's lots of rule breaking increases the likelihood that there's going to be a similar event happening in the future. And then I'd basically carry on working through the whole scenario until I've got my at least 5 points, or as many points that come out at me. So what I would end up with at the end of that process, and obviously do the same for the consequence as well, would be something like this. So all of those things, 12 of them, are what I would be, you know, justifying my decision to put likelihood as being certain based on those points from the scenario. Same for consequence. So level of investigation high, and another point I've made is that any incident that gives rise to potential fatal consequences should always be followed up with a high level investigation regardless of likelihood. Don't know whether there'll be a point available for that, but maybe. So phase 2 would be now to use the information in that table to put together your first draft of an actual answer to the question that you would actually submit on the answer paper. This needs to be in my own words, but I can and should reference other sources of information such as HSG 245. as an example of that first point that we looked at regarding rule breaking. So lots of rule breaking, suggesting a poor health and safety culture amongst the workforce, and that this type of unsafe behaviour has become normalised. So that's what, 22 words. I could maybe, I've got some room to expand on that a little bit if I wanted to. So I would do that for each of the points that I've got in my table, and what I would end up with would be something like this: 330 words. Pause the video if you'd like, have a read through and see what you think. There's more than 10 points there. Again, it's probably not a perfect answer, but I would be fairly confident that there's enough points on there for me to achieve a decent crop of points. What I would recommend doing is drafting your answers in a word counter, simply because you can keep an eye on the words as you're drafting your answer in real time, because I don't think it's necessary to get too hung up on word counts at this stage, because you can always edit it down later. But the thing is, you've got to keep it somewhat under control. We're trying to keep our answer inside of around 300 to 330 words. That's going to keep us on track for not going over our word count across the entire paper. And we've got 10 points that we want to make within that 330 words. Then that's obviously 30 to 33 words per point on average. And then if you start writing and you're still on your first point, but you've written 60 words already, you'll get to the end. If you carry on writing too much, you'll end up with like 600 words or so that you've written. Now, I know I said that you can edit it down, but you don't want to leave yourself with 600 words to try and edit down to 300 words. That's too much. You're going to be leaving yourself with too much work to do in the final stages. So I think it's realistic to be able to edit, say, 400 words down to 330 words. That's doable. So what I think is a reasonable approach to take is just keep an eye on your word count when you're drafting your first draft, just to make sure it doesn't go completely off the rails. So you can write a few extra words and edit them down, but don't go to town on your answers. Make sure that your writing is succinct and you're not using unnecessary words and you're not repeating yourself. So in summary, I'd start with something like that as a structure. Then I'd populate it, pulling out information from the scenario, and then this is just each of those points in that second column that have been expanded on, just using a couple of sentences or so to expand on the point, making sure that it's within the word count. If you've managed your time effectively, you could always come back to this and then edit it further, or take out points that you don't think are strong enough and replace them with other points that have occurred to you that you think stand more chance of scoring. So hope that's helpful. If you've got your exam coming up soon, very best of luck with it. I hope you've got some value out of the video that you've just seen. If so, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel so that you can be alerted to when we produce and upload more videos.